Next, it's time for our new show, On the Money. Today, Peter Laval and his guests discuss ways to improve the investment climate in Russia.
Hungry for the full story? We've got it firsthand. The biggest issues get a human voice, face to face with the newsmakers on RT.
Hello and welcome to On the Money, where the business of Russia is business. Today we're talking about Russia's financial modernizations, its prospects and challenges. And to do that, I'm joined by Alexei Museev. He is Deputy Head of Research and Head of the Macroeconomics Research Team at VTB Capital. And Hok Sanshайн. He is Managing Director, Portfolio Investments at IFC Metropole. Also, we have Yulia Syplayeva. She is Chief Economist on Russia and CIS, BNP Paribas. And we also turn to Daniel Salter. He is Chief EMEA Equity Strategist at Unicredit Securities. First, Alexei, I'd like to go to you. Not long ago, a think tank in London came out with the following. The London-based Yen think tank, which produces biannual rankings of global financial centers based on their competitiveness, ranked Moscow 68 out of 75. That was in September of last year. They said nothing has changed to today. 68 out of 75. That's not very good.
No, it's not very good. In fact, I'm quite surprised there are 75 international financial centers in the world out of 160 countries, right? So, but seriously, I think that Russia has a unique option here. If Russia doesn't screw things up and does things right in terms of setting up the environment and infrastructure, it is a natural advantage of Russia being a natural center for the CIS. CIS financial markets have been largely...
So you're saying first countrywide, then regional?
That's right. No, that's regional. All Russia can shoot for at this stage is regional center for the other CIS countries. Firstly, for the Central Asian countries, then possibly for Ukraine and possibly for Belarus. In fact, there's one evidence of that, which is Belarus trying to replace ruble bonds, which is the first evidence of Russia becoming somewhat of a financial center.
Okay, Hok, if I can go to you. When you talk to your clients, what are they looking for? What is the major problem they see?
One of the major problems here in Russia is infrastructure. I'm totally not surprised that Russia's ranked 68 out of 75, although I agree with Alexei that are there really 75 financial centers. The problem here is infrastructure. When you arrive at the airport, the lines for passport control, the hassle of getting to the center of town, it takes hours to get to the center of town sometimes if you want to take a car. Unlike other financial centers. I think the infrastructure has to be drastically improved here in Russia before Russia can lay claim to more than just a regional financial center.
Yeah, Julia, you're an economist. I mean, from a macro scale, what do you think the major barrier is? Because we heard even back in 2008 that President Medvedev wanted to make this one of his priorities. Now, we had to go through the financial crisis. Russia's done reasonably well. But have they learned anything from the financial crisis, or are we just are in the same place we were back in 2008?
I would fully agree that infrastructure is the main problem and the main obstacle. But at the same time, I would also highlight the importance of investment climate. In my view, there are a lot of efforts made by the Russian government to improve sentiment about foreign investors and to boost importance of foreign investments in general. However, still logistics is not that simple, and there are a lot of logistical problems for foreign investors coming. At the same time, still Russia has a reputation that it is not fully investor-friendly country in general. So I would put this bunch of problems to the table as well.
Okay, Daniel, if I can go to you. I mean, let's match the rhetoric with actions. I mean, I've heard this for 2 years. Russia wants to become a major financial center. I've even heard the global financial center. What is being done? Is the actions and rhetoric matching in any way?
I think you're seeing gradual progress being made. We've seen recently the merger of the two main markets in Russia, the MySex and the RTS index. That's one thing. You've seen the ability now of foreign companies to list in Russia using RDR programs, Russian depository receipts. You've seen big development in terms of derivatives tradings. So things are progressing gradually, but there's still a lot of work
Daniel,
to do.
if I could stay with you, then why are Russian companies still listing bond issues on foreign exchanges here? I mean, it isn't attractive enough, and what needs to change for that to happen?
Yeah. For me, there are two reasons. Firstly, it's very easy to list overseas. You've got a lot of expertise. You've got all the lawyers. You've got all the accountants, all the legal experts there overseas already in places like London and New York. So it's a one-stop shop. You get all the services you need in one place. The other one is in Russia, we've still got very underdeveloped domestic asset management industries. And if you look at most of the successful financial markets around the world, you've got very strong domestic investors, either pension funds or insurance companies. And that kind of longer-term, more stable money within Russia is yet to really develop on a large scale.
Alexei, I like that. One-stop shop. Now that's what it's really all about, isn't it, here?
No, absolutely, absolutely. But the point is that what Russia is, the place where Russia can get an advantage is Russia is far less regulated environment. Okay. It is one-stop shop for Dodd-Frank Act and for European anti-whatever derivatives act and all the sorts of things. You don't have to list all the swaps you produce in Russia. You don't have to report all those huge reportings. Rating agencies are not liable for their ratings in Russia and so on and so forth. So I think that for some countries where it's not a staple to produce international financial accounting standards, and in fact smaller companies for whom it's quite expensive to pay for all those London lawyers and London accountants, I think that...
But does that cover the concerns of transparency for some people?
Well, question is whether the transparency begins and stops, and when it's basically its actual hurdles begin and stop in terms of regulation. If you listen to what Senators Dodd and Senator Frank say, they actually don't talk about transparency only, they actually talk about actually literally limiting the vibrancy of the financial markets, especially if you listen to Paul Volcker. He doesn't want financial markets the way they are, right? Does he? Right, so that's the point.
Well, I'm sorry, who wanted to jump in there? Go ahead.
Yeah, Peter, I totally disagree with Alexei. To say that the lack of regulation in the market is a great thing, then we'd say, well, we could take that to the absurd and say, well, then the Congolese or the Cameroon stock exchange would be even better. Because when you have absolutely no regulation, if you take a look at where money is in the world, a lot of this money is institutional money, a lot of this money is sophisticated investors. And in a market that's not regulated, that I'm just taking Alexei's words and saying that where they don't perform due diligence at a certain level on companies, then investors won't even want to get involved in that market because they'll know the risks are very high, and it's the same kind of market that would appeal to private placement sort of investors. If you look at the world, you see how many global financial centers do we need? 3, 2, maybe 1 to cover each time zone so that there's always one working. I mean, there's a lot of competition to become a global financial center, and I think that the way of saying that we have no regulation would not be the approach that Russia is going to take in order to increase its significance, Moscow in particular, to increase its significance as a global financial center.
Alexei, do you want to reply to that?
I didn't say that. I agree with you that no regulation. I mean, look at Congolese or, I don't know, whatever other stock markets. Obviously, it's no regulation is bad. It's too much. It's taken what absurd one side, but I think that the Americans and British are taking to absurd another side. How many hedge funds you know and I know that moved from London to Singapore and to Swiss, right? Singapore is becoming hedge fund capital of the world these days, right?
You sure that's not because of personal tax regulation? Because the hedge fund managers who are making huge amounts of money don't want to pay 50% plus taxes in New York or London?
Yeah, taxes are, of course, a major issue, of course, but Russia does have a tax advantage.
Okay, let's talk about, I want to go to Julia. I want to talk about another issue that a lot of people talk about, and that is the rule of law. And this is an issue that is brought up often in dealing with Russia. I used to at one time be a financial analyst at a major bank here in Russia, and that was back in the late 90s, and I still hear the same complaints to this day. So, Julia, what about the rule of law?
Yes, there are a lot of complaints, and situation is improving, but improving very gradually. As a result, I expect at least 1 more decade to fully remove this problem. So this is the issue. Timing is crucial as usual. If the global target is to make Russia and Moscow a new financial center in a global sense of this word, it is possible to do, but we are unlikely to get result in 2-3 years. And the main issue, whether the Russian government is sufficiently patient and whether it is likely to continue all these efforts, to improve the situation and to introduce rule of law. It is important not only from the point of view of financial sector, it is a more global problem for Russia.
Okay, Daniel, if I can go to you. I mean, we hear a lot what the Russian government wants to do. We hear the Ministry of Finance and other institutions like Sberbank and other banks what they want to do. But what are your investors saying they want to see happen in Russia before they move more money into this country? Because we all know there's a certain amount of dollars out there and they go to a certain number of places. What can be the attraction to come to Russia as opposed to another market?
Well, I think it's the opportunity. Investors will come to wherever they can buy stocks, where they can trade them, where markets are liquid, and where they feel protected. And I think, over the midterm, what you'll see in Russia is that Russians they're living longer. Life expectancy is increasing, and so you'll see naturally over time Russians looking to save money, and that money in terms of pension funds and insurance money will be invested into the Russian market. And I think when you see that happening, these Russian domestic investors will want to feel protected. They'll want their domestic legal system, the regulatory environment of the stock market to improve, to protect their own long-term life savings. And I think that is what will change the market and cause foreign investors to become more confident in the environment here.
All right, before we go to the break, Alexei, that's a very interesting point that we talk about foreign investors all the time, but Russians are becoming themselves much more sophisticated in dealing with their finances, because before you just put the money in the bank and you hope the bank didn't collapse in the 1990s. Totally different environment today.
Well, I'm not sure I actually agree with that. I have to say that the financial services industry outside of banks have collapsed during the last crisis, and the government has done a good job bailing out the banking system, but they didn't do anything to save the mutual funds and the insurance companies and so on. Life insurance, mutual funds do not exist in Russia. That's a problem. I completely agree with Daniel here. But also to come back to some of the earlier comments, I'm not...
All right. After a short break, we'll continue our discussion on modernizing Russia's financial sector. Stay with RT.
Download the official RT application to your iPhone or iPod Touch from the iTunes App Store. Watch RT live on the go. Video on demand. RT's live broadcasts. And RSS feeds now in the palm of your hand. Question more on RT.com.
Welcome back to On the Money. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about what Russia is doing to modernize its financial system. But first, let's have an overview of where Russia is on this issue and where it's going.
The global financial crisis, which exposed the international banking system, saw Russia avert catastrophe. But the experience underlined the need to expand the domestic financial sector and provide a local alternative to the listings and bond placements corporate Russia takes overseas. It is increasingly seen as essential, but also as encompassing profound changes for the Russian finance and corporate world.
It is a question of survival for a country to build such a financial center, to attract the necessary funds, and Russia will depend on foreign investments for many, many, many years to come. And to attract these funds, you have to attract the investor, you have to attract the foreign institutions, you have to make the country welcoming foreign investments, not just for the investment, but to allow these foreign institutions to make money, to be part of the environment, to be properly treated.
Developing greater confidence in the legal system and protections for minority shareholders remains a priority, despite holding up better than widely expected during the economic downturn.
The experience of foreign creditors, local creditors, foreign investors, minority investors during this recent crisis, again, in a situation where a lot of difficult negotiations had to be held and major restructurings had to be done, is all of them got together and negotiated difficult solutions. Yes, some people lost money, but for the most part, the core essence of the contractual claims that they were entered into, were respected.
Also needed to be an overhaul of national savings and pensions, development of institutional investors, auxiliary services, human capital, and the range of financial instruments. It will not happen in the short term, but only through further development can the financial system help reduce volatility and smooth the path to economic growth. Daria Chernysova, On the Money, RT.
Okay, I'd like to talk about two issues that we haven't really mentioned here, and I'd like to go to Alexei here first in the studio. Let's talk about the ruble, where the ruble needs to go if Russia wants to become a financial center, a major financial center, and inflation here. Let's talk about both. Is the ruble attractive enough to complement a financial center? Every financial center has a currency.
Well, that's a good point, and I think that it's not necessarily attractiveness of currency as an investment object, because there are a lot of countries where currencies are attractive to invest in, but not necessarily these countries become financial centers, even though out of 75, I'm sure that there must be some
other currencies out there, sure.
But nevertheless, the point is that it's obviously predictability of the exchange rate, predictability of monetary policy, macroeconomic stability, and clearly the fact that inflation is now creeping at the level around 10% is a big problem. And
it's been a problem for Russia for a long time.
Exactly right.
Actually, it was the financial crisis that actually slowed it down for the first time that I've lived here.
No, absolutely. And in fact, I think that a lot of things, for example, the law on central bank was devised in 1993 and hasn't really been changed since then. That's a major problem, right? Those things need to be addressed. There's a myriad of things which need to be addressed. And clearly, in order for Russia to become what is financial center? It's a place where people come and list and people come and invest. And for that, clearly, macroeconomic stability is one of the major prerequisites. That's obvious.
Okay, Hok, if I can go to you, is the government doing enough to deal with inflation? And we have to look at oil prices are on the way back up in a big way.
You know, I think that the government's monetary policy has been unpredictable in the past. If we look at a couple months ago, we saw oil prices rising from a crisis level of, let's say, $40 to $90, and we see the ruble barely reacting to that, and very high levels of inflation. I think that the monetary policy in the government has been inconsistent, and the ruble exchange rate and the ruble stability is unpredictable. There is no stability, and largely in the foreign investment community, I don't think that there's much faith or interest in the ruble as a global currency. Let's look at the dollar, for example. Let's compare the ruble to the dollar to take two extremes. We see a large majority of global financial instruments listed in dollars. I think the ruble is a long way off from becoming a global currency. But as Alexei said, this is not necessarily necessary to become to move up in the rankings from 68 out of 75 global financial centers.
But okay, Julia, but if I can go to you, it certainly would be a nice plus if we had the people were attracted to the ruble as an exchange unit.
Well, I also believe that Russia has some advantage if we consider this currency. Say, we have no capital controls in Russia, and capital controls are very unlikely to be introduced in future. However, in my view, I would agree with Alexei that macroeconomic stability is the issue. For me, it is very important to have a more or less predictable ruble to be sure that Russia could be properly developed into global financial center. Currently, ruble is very dependent on oil prices, and oil prices are too volatile. Yeah, and this is unlikely to disappear in the coming years, in my view. As a result, all efforts of the government will just approach Russia to better position in this famous list, where Russia is only 68 from 75, but unlikely to result in some practical outcome. Nevertheless, even any movement in the right direction is very positive in my view.
Daniel, if I can go to you, I mean,
could bring some gains.
In a conversation about finance in Russia, it always seems to get back to oil, which, you know, when there's when prices are going up, there are certain people here that are very, very happy, and then there are a lot of other people in the world that aren't. I mean, is it always going to be tied to the ruble? I mean, the ruble is always going to be tied to the price of oil, and then we have the inflation factor. Is this a vicious circle that can be broken out of somehow?
It's clearly going to be an Achilles heel for Russia. It is a commodity-producing country. The government can try and stabilize the ruble by using things like saving the oil surplus overseas, as they've tried to do in the past. That can help, a bit like what Norway does, putting money into a stabilization fund, into an overseas savings account. I think what will also happen is over time we'll see creation of long-term investment products in Russia. You'll have long-term pension funds looking for long-term assets, so long-term bond markets developing in Russia, and that will make things more stable, as it will mean the flows of money into and out of the ruble could become a bit less important when you have a much bigger domestic savings base looking to buy Russian assets, Russian financial assets.
You know, Alexei, I'm going to go back to you here in the studio. One of the things that really bothers me living in Russia, and I've been here for almost 13 years, is the lack of competition. Is there enough competition in the banking sector, another key pillar of being a financial center? Is there enough competition in the banking sector?
Well, I think that the central bank has worked very hard to establish that all banks have equal access to liquidity, and we obviously know that Sberbank is different. Right, and it's Sberbank and everybody else, right? And
you.
Well, even for us, Sberbank is different, right? So it's even for us it's tough with them. But anyway, that's yeah, you name it. Even on state banks, there are like 5 of them.
I mean, but how many banks here have a wide variety of instruments that you can have when we look at retirement and we look at these kind of things here? I mean, there's still only a small number that people actually look to.
Exactly. I think that's exactly the point. It's not the number of banks you have. You have countries with 1 or 2 banks working, right? That's fine. The point is that there's really underdeveloped system of saving. I completely agree with Daniel here, is that it's life insurance, it's mutual funds, things like that, as they develop. As the government actually works hard to ensure that people have trust in those things, and fully funded pension system is something which they've started to do, and they haven't really progressed, and now government talks about developing pension system again. So if those things develop, then the local savings base, local investment base is created outside of banks. That's when actually the biggest hope for Russian financial center is, I think, actually lies.
Hok, if I can go back to you, I mean, would competition more in the marketplace here for Russians within their market here, would that be more attractive for foreigners coming in here saying that there is competition here? Because there isn't a lot in a lot of sectors.
Well, I agree with you. I think that increasing competition does not make the market more attractive. It makes it less attractive. But allowing the potential for competition certainly would. You know, I think that there are a lot of barriers to maybe not formalized, but semi-administrative barriers to opening up shop here in Russia. And there's a lot of rules that keep competition, especially foreign competition, out of Russia. And I think that that definitely makes Russia a less attractive place for foreign investment, and therefore number 68 out of 75 on the list.
Daniel, how about you? What about more competition in the marketplace will make it more attractive for other people to come in here and make it the global center that Mr. Medvedev really wants it to be?
I think competition is good because it breeds excellence usually. The more competition there is, the better the service standards are, and so therefore the more attractive as a financial centre Russia will become. People will want to come to the best banks, the best legal firms and so on in the world. Now, there's clearly a risk that a couple of big state-owned institutions could start to dominate here. I think it's a good move in the short term. You're creating a domestic expertise base in investment banking, but the challenge for the government will be to prevent those big institutions becoming too dominant in the market.
Okay, I'd like to finish off with Julia here. I'm told that it's conductivity, it's diversity and depth that makes a city, a marketplace, a financial center. What needs out of those three, Russia needs to do most on a hierarchy? What's the most important thing it can do? The last word on the program.
My thoughts about this, it's improvement in infrastructure. It is more transparent and stable legislation, and simpler logistics.
Simply, Alexei, we still got a few seconds.
Yep.
What would you say your priority?
Well, I think that it's really depth, right? Because a lot of places where everything kind of exists, but there's no actual depth into it, and that's I think what's really important.
And as far as conductivity is concerned.
Well, connectivity is difficult. I mean, you go to places like Sao Paulo, right? It's not much better there, right? But you have actually much. Sorry, that's my impression. But Sao Paulo is obviously much more. I'm sure much more ahead than Russia in this 75 or whatever. So I think that it's really depth and domestic financial base. Depth and domestic financial base.
Thank you, Alexei. All right, okay, we've run out of time. I want to thank my guests here today, and I want to thank our viewers for watching us here on the Money. See you next time, and stay with RT.